welcome back to the Elle-Sera podcast. And today we've got Dr. Frank back. So Dr. Frank was on a few months ago and we did a great chat. And we just were chatting so much we didn't even get on to one of the subjects I wanted to get onto, which was thyroid. So he's back today and we're going to focus on a few things around thyroid because this seems to be a huge issue for women. So Frank, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So I always hear about thyroid issues more specifically in relation to women. I know men who have them, but are very rare. And what is your thyroid? Where I believe it's here, butterfly gland here.
Yep.
Master regulator of all the.
Kind of ish. So
you tell me. You're the expert.
Let's go through it.
School me.
Let's go through it. So the thyroid gland is really, really probably the most important hormone-producing gland in the body because it controls metabolism, okay? So as you said, it sits in the neck. It's a butterfly-shaped gland that kind of straddles the windpipe in your neck. Now, in terms of how it works and how it's controlled, so you have the pituitary gland, which sits right here at the bottom of the brain. And the pituitary is actually the master controller of all the other glands in your body, okay? So the way that the pituitary looks after the thyroid is that it makes a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. So that then goes from your pituitary, floats around in your blood and comes to the thyroid and says to the thyroid, okay, you need to make the actual thyroid hormone. Now, the thyroid then makes that thyroid hormone in the amount that your body needs, assuming everything's working normally. And then if you're making enough of the thyroid hormone, that will then service the body. It will then also travel back to the pituitary gland and say, look, there's enough of the thyroid hormone being made. You don't need to keep telling us. And these two hormones, the TSH, as we call it, and the free T4 and free T3, those are the two key hormones that we talk about, T4 and T3. And they kind of balance each other out if everything's working normally, right? So that's kind of where it sits, how it's controlled, what it makes, and how it's controlled biochemically. Now, what does the thyroid gland actually do? So when I say it's important because it's the hormone of metabolism. What does that mean? So it's easier sometimes to describe it in terms of if you didn't have enough or if you have too much, okay? So the not having enough thyroid hormone being made is called hypothyroidism. That's HYP and an O at the end. And that means you are not manufacturing the thyroid hormone the way you should be doing. Now, when you don't make enough of this stuff, everything just slows down. So you start to slow your metabolism down. So you start to gain weight. You start to feel really cold. When everybody else around you is like, I feel hot, you're feeling cold. You start to feel really sluggish and tired and sleepy and fatigued, and everything's an effort. Your skin starts to go dry, your nails start to get thinner, you start to lose hair, and essentially you start to puff up and you get this thing called myxedema. So it's not like fluid buildup, it's like a funny kind of substance that gets deposited under your skin, and it's called myxedema. And so you get a lot of physical changes that you can see, but you also get a lot of symptoms because everything just literally slows down. So that goes to show you how important having the right amount of thyroid hormone in your system can be. If you don't have enough, you'll basically just not want to get out of bed in the morning and you'll just be freezing all the time and gaining weight.
I'm always freezing.
So I think, it's one of those things that we recognize more and more in terms of underactive thyroids, and people are becoming more and more aware, and we're picking up on these things. The other extreme is when you have too much thyroid hormone in your system, or what we call thyrotoxicosis. And what essentially happens is when you have too much of the T4 and the T3 being produced, everything's just in overdrive. Yeah. It's almost like you're on speed, and you're anxious, you're hot and sweating, your nerves are going all the time, you've got tremors, your heart's racing, you get palpitations, your bowels start to go faster. When you're underactive, you tend to be more constipated. You can lose hair both ends of the spectrum. Your skin tends to be a little bit more red and sweaty and greasy when you're overactive. Interestingly, what you're supposed to do when you are overactive is you tend to lose weight, but you tend to lose bad weight. So not only do you lose fat, but you also lose muscle. So you actually feel weaker and more tired with an overactive thyroid because of the effect that it's catabolic. So which means that it doesn't grow, it breaks down the proteins in your system. So you start to lose weight in a bad way. And the other thing that you find is occasionally you'll get a bit of a kind of conundrum where you don't see weight loss, but you see weight gain. And that's because in some people, having an overactive thyroid can drive appetite and hunger. It's called polyphagia. So you just basically feel hungry all the time. And although you're thinking, well, I'm overactive, but I'm not losing weight. I'm actually gaining weight. But that can happen too at times. So tiredness goes both ways. But generally, you kind of know when you're underactive or overactive. And what you want is to obviously have good thyroid health in the middle of the normal range to keep you functioning well and doing well. I guess the other bit that people often will ask me is, okay, so why does my thyroid become abnormal?
Yeah.
So there are certain things that we look for. So first of all, if someone is getting symptoms of an underactive or overactive thyroid, as I've just described, the thing you want to do is go and get a blood test. Okay, so the blood test will look at your thyroid hormones to tell you, are you over or underactive? Now, if you are over or underactive, you then need to think about why that happens. And the commonest thing that we find is something called autoimmune thyroid dysfunction. So autoimmunity basically means that some people genetically, and it runs in families, so the thyroid dysfunction, that genetically your genes predispose you to having an immune system that normally should make antibodies to fight off viruses, COVID, whatever that might have been. But instead of just fighting off the virus, it decides that it wants to carry on fighting and it doesn't have anything to get rid of or fight against. So it just turns on you.
Right.
And as it turns on you, it goes to your thyroid gland in this case. So you have something called thyroid peroxidase antibodies or TPO antibodies. Sometimes we check something called the antithyroglobulin antibodies. And those are two that we associate with an underactive thyroid. And if you have these antibody levels go up, and it could happen at any time in your life, right? There's no rhyme, no reason sometimes. Theoretically, we say that, you might get a viral infection and then the virus then triggers the autoimmune response and then it just carries on and you stay high with the antibodies and they go and switch off the manufacturing in your thyroid gland and start to make you become underactive.
Right.
So essentially, that autoimmunity, that family history, that genetic sort of predisposition is the commonest thing that we tend to see in terms of people developing an underactive thyroid. Now, you can get antibodies that go the other way. So you can get something called thyroid receptor stimulating antibodies. And they go and switch on the thyroid and make it hyperactive. So you make more hormone, so you can become overactive. So the role of the thyroid antibodies either is to go and switch off production or to put you into hyperdrive and make more of the hormone. So that's the commonest cause of why it happens. We also see people with what's called goiters. So goiters are enlarged thyroid glands, right? So thyroid gland enlargement, there's lots of reasons why that can happen. Sometimes it just does happen. Some families are predisposed to it. Back in the day, it used to be about iodine deficiency. So if you lived more inland and you didn't have a lot of iodine, because you used to get a lot of iodine from seawater, and the closer you were to the coast, seaweed and stuff like that. So the closer you were to the coast, the less likely you were. They used to actually call it Derbyshire neck at one point, right? And essentially, you just get lumpy bits. They're benign, but you get lumpier and lumpier thyroid glands that grow over time. Now, these nodules or multinodular goiters, as we call them, don't necessarily cause you any issues other than they get bigger, they look a bit unsightly, and you might need to deal with it for that reason. Sometimes they get big enough to cause kind of difficulty with breathing or swallowing when you're lying flat on your back or you're trying to swallow something solid. But you've got to get to a certain size to be able to do that. Occasionally, these nodules will either make a little bit more, will usually make a little bit more hormone than normal, and you can become overactive as a result of that too. And so, again, those are probably the two commonest scenarios that we see, either the autoimmune over or underactivity or these goiters that develop over time. And that's what we kind of see most often.
So So that was amazing information. Wow, like amazing. So I've got a few things to say, pick up on here. So, okay, so I think obviously we speak to loads of ladies, and I speak to loads of ladies all the time, even when I was doing retreats and, through the Elle-Sera page. A lot of them have thyroid issues. And I mean, can some of it be triggered by lifestyle? And then over time, your body's then creating more T3, T4, and causing these issues? What should we be looking at to try and prevent these, going either way, the hypothyroidism, the underactive or the overactive?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, right? There isn't a lot of data out there on how these things start off. One of the things that you anecdotally will hear, and almost all my patients that I see, you don't always find that viral infection. It doesn't always predate or precede the actual onset of the illness from a thyroid point of view. But often stress, and it tends to be quite overwhelming stress. Sometimes it's a bereavement where you've lost someone you've loved, or it can be, some overwhelming stress where it's resulted in a severe sort of mental health issue. And somehow that triggers an overactivity. The underactivity, it just kind of comes on to people. People talk about, well, what are the other things you can do to have a clean thyroid, right? And some of the things we're picking up on, and again, not necessarily in the medical literature backed up, but I know from experience of talking to people, so stuff that they look at is diet. And one of the things we know that is associated with underactive thyroid is gluten intolerance. So we know that celiac disease or full-blown gluten, sensitivity and allergy has got the same genetics that causes the underactive or overactive thyroid genes where you have autoimmunity. So they're kind of associated anyway. Most people don't get full-blown celiac and thyroid dysfunction. Thyroid tends to be the commoner one, but you have to keep an open mind and think about it.
I mean, I believe that pretty much everyone on the planet is probably in some way gluten intolerant, but it's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum.
Of like, yes, you're full-blown celiac, or, well, you're just a bit intolerant up here.
Absolutely.
And actually, I always feel better without it.
Yeah.
Always better without it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, likewise. So I went gluten-free about 8-9 years ago, just realized it wasn't for me. It was killing my insides and just felt so uncomfortable. So I'm gluten-free. When I say gluten-free, I'm not 100%. I'm not like someone with celiac, so I don't want to underplay, how difficult it is for some people to deal with that side of things. But I know that if I have a large amount of gluten, it is just not comfortable. If I have a pizza, it's like you feel bloated, sluggish. And that is your body's way of triggering, I don't feel good after this. For sure.
But the problem is people think that's like a normal state to be in.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how good you can feel because you've never removed it for a period of time where you actually feel fantastic without it.
Absolutely. So what you're referring to there is, there's full-blown celiac, but you have, it's a medical term called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or NCGS. And it's something that people don't often talk about that much because everybody labels it irritable bowel syndrome. And you get irritable bowel symptoms often because of food intolerances, and you do like various elimination diets and you reintroduce and see if you can manage those foods. But the challenge is that for some people, that sensitivity is very uncomfortable to the point that in some people who have thyroxine treatment because they're underactive, when you eat more gluten-containing food, you tend to find that their thyroid hormone medication isn't absorbed as well, and their blood tests go skew-whiff, right? And they start to feel unwell. And then you cut down on the amount of gluten you're consuming, you start absorbing your thyroxine better, and you start to feel better. So there is definitely an interplay between gluten as a food that triggers some sort of reaction and the association with thyroid problems. Now, whether that's just the fact that they interfere with each other or whether one leads the other is a little bit gray. Don't know. But I guess, in general, I would say to people that if you're looking at thyroid health and you're starting to become gluten sensitive, think about cutting down on the amount you consume.
I just think about being in the wild, and I was actually just talking to Calvin about this before you came in, Frank. I lived on a desert island, right? Probably how as close as you can get to being a caveman in terms of fishing for yourself, eating coconuts, everything raw. There's no processing, there's no nothing. In the wild, would we go and hunt out wheat or gluten? Probably not. You'd see wheat and it's like, not very pleasant to eat. It's not very bright coloured. You probably would eat maybe a little bit of it, but nowhere near the amount that we've got now in today's diet.
No.
And I always think back to that as my baseline and think, there is no way on planet Earth I would have been able to eat the amount of gluten that I am eating in a Western diet. Or you'd think, God, that tastes like shit. I'm not eating that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you'd eat a bit of it, but not a lot of it. And now we're consuming it nearly at every mealtime. And before everyone goes and rushes down the gluten-free aisle, naturally gluten-free food is not the same as gluten-free processed food.
For sure.
Which we are not advocating for.
No. I think it's just finding alternatives.
Correct.
It's not finding gluten-free, but finding alternatives.
Exactly.
So, rice, potatoes. If you want to get your starch and your carbs from somewhere.
Sweet potatoes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's always options.
Yeah.
So that's probably one thing from a dietary point of view. Then there's a lot of talk about sort of selenium. And people like to have selenium in the diet. Iodine, obviously, is one. So if you don't have enough iodine, that can contribute to thyroid dysfunction.
Would you take iodine orally? I see a lot of people putting it on their skin.
Yeah, so we don't really recommend it in the medical world. I think, if you know, most salt nowadays is iodized anyway.
Right.
So we get a lot of iodine from fortified food. So as we've recognized the importance of all the various minerals and vitamins that are needed, most foods nowadays will come with stuff fortified within it. So we don't tend to see as much of a need for taking additional iodine. People may use kelp, may use seaweed, that kind of stuff. But actually, as long as you're getting a healthy diet nowadays, you'll probably find that you're getting most of what you need.
I mean, there's an argument over what the hell is a healthy diet.
That is true.
I go back to caveman. I go back to my island and think, well,
that's it.
What would I have eaten there?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I would have been eating a little bit of meat, a bit of fish, very little. Well, I hardly ever use sauces or anything. But I'm fully with you. But it is difficult. Everyone's busy. They're reaching for convenience foods.
For sure. Absolutely.
I've said this before on this podcast, but there's a big trend between a woman who went and got a career and obesity levels rising because now mum's so busy. She has to now still go to work full time and then go to the supermarket, then try and make something for tea. And the supermarkets have filled that gap for convenience for her.
Oh, yeah. I think the ultra processed foods, we recognize that completely, And I think it's finding that balance between, getting some fresh food into the house, cooking it from scratch, there's more to it than nutrition. I think there's a mental health thing when you sit down as a family and you have that conversation piece over
and a
meal.
respect for actually what you're eating, especially animal protein and things like that. There's an animal that's died on the other end of this to be eating it. Actually, are you conscious of that fact? Most people are not because it comes in a plastic packet. And I did it the other day. I'm always in work, but anyway, work from home. So I went to the farm shop, did all that, and decided to make a curry from scratch. By the time I'd chopped everything, done the whole process, must have been, and been in the farm shop and got the meat from somewhere else and whatever, 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Like, long time. Do you want me to do that every single night as well? And then go to the gym and sort the baby out? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's nuts. And I always toy with myself and think, should I just be a stay-at-home mum?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
And I would definitely have this kind of respect and cook from scratch. Yeah, that's the dream.
It is. I think from a nutritional point of view, the other thing that you also find with people with thyroid dysfunction is, so we talked about kind of the gluten thing. Some people talk about lactose as well, but not as much as gluten. The other thing that people will find is that if they are a little bit, so one of the things that people with an underactive thyroid, we'll talk about that maybe first, is, the fatigue tends to be the biggest issue for a lot of people. Brain fog. They say that, we treat them with thyroxine, which is a standard treatment, and it does help for 99% of patients. I think will be fine on thyroxine. You'll get the numbers right and they'll get on with life. You do get a small percentage who, despite what you do, feel tired and fatigued. And they're the sort of patients who come and, will ask for help and say, look, I'm taking it. My numbers seem to be okay. But even the numbers, I think there's a bit of finessing to be done because the range for hormones can be quite big. And sometimes people are better at the top end of the hormone range. Some people are better at the middle of the range. Some people are better at the bottom of the range. It just depends on the individual. So, one of the things that I worry about sometimes, and a lot of the feedback I get from patients who eventually come to see me because they're desperate, is that they get told, well, your numbers are normal.
Yeah.
And so, get on with it. It's just
Yeah.
you're tired. And I'm like, well, actually, that's not entirely true.
There's a difference between being, okay, I'm not going to die, I'm not deficient, and optimally thriving.
Absolutely.
Massive difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big conversation piece for a lot of my patients. And therefore, it's important to think that if you're sluggish, if you're tired, if you're not performing at 100%, if all, pistons aren't going, think about whether you're on the right amount, even though your blood test may say normal. Think about what normal is for you as an individual and what's optimal for you as an individual. And so there's a bit of tweaking to be done there. The other thing you find is that a lot of patients with an underactive thyroid also, because of the intolerance to gluten, they don't often absorb their vitamins and minerals as well. So it's important to make sure that, your vitamin B12, especially, I tend to find that works better. So if your thyroid's okay, but you're still tired and fatigued or brain fogged, sometimes getting your B12 levels right up to the top end of the range helps.
What's the best way to take B12? Is it, I used to have it intramuscular from the doctor.
Yeah.
I thought that was the best way. I know a lot of people put it in supplements and take it. And I always think, well, it's so low, it's not really, it's not really an absorbable form.
So okay, so the best way to take B12 is the way that it gets you to the top end of the range.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that for me. And the thing you got to be mindful of is that if you have autoimmune conditions, so you actually make antibodies in your stomach that stop you from absorbing B12, it's called the intrinsic factor antibodies. So that's where you get the term pernicious anemia from.
Yeah, I've had that.
Yeah, and pernicious anemia goes hand in hand with hypothyroidism. Again, similar genes, similar autoimmune issues. So in someone like that, giving them a load of oral B12 doesn't do anything because you don't absorb the thing. So what you have to do in those scenarios is definitely think about intramuscular injections. If you are negative for the antibodies for B12, but you are tired and fatigued and your levels are kind of the bottom end of the range, not necessarily below the normal range. Now, one of the things that, again, we struggle with in the NHS, and that's because the NHS is designed for certain things and for certain levels of severity, is that it's difficult to get a course of B12 unless your levels are below the normal range. But a lot of the patients I see tend to just be at the cusp. They'll be just into the normal range.
I'm at the cusp because I actually did a blood test with Dam Health.
Yeah.
And it came back, you're normal for your iron and your B12, but you're very low.
That's it.
And I know I'm not thriving. I know I'm not. So I'm like, and I still haven't addressed it, by the way. So, and actually that's my question. I was thinking this as so I'm not deficient in iron. So I'm not going to go and get a prescription for iron or anything like that. But actually I need to be incorporating more iron. What way would I do it? Yeah.
So if you're talking about iron, so iron just orally is fine. The problem with oral iron is that it doesn't tend to suit people's bowels very well.
No, I've been through that. It's not the best. I've had loads of different versions. I've had gentle iron, which is a little bit better, but I feel like it's not as effective. And then I've had Spartone.
So Spartone works for a lot of people. It's not a huge amount of iron. It's a very little amount, but it's gentle on the tummy, right?
Yeah. So I looked at the dose on Spartone, which take 1 a day. I was taking 6 a day.
Yeah. And that's what you need.
And I think when I was like looking at it, I was like, pointless unless I'm doing a lot of it. So,
absolutely.
I'm a cavalier with things like that anyway. But when I looked through the literature of, okay, how much do I need on a daily basis? All the supplements out there were so low dosed. I was like, there's got to be a better way to take this.
So, within iron, so the standard iron that you get is either ferrous sulfate or ferrous fumarate.
Yeah.
But actually, there is something called ferrous gluconate, which is a little bit gentler on the tummy compared to the other two based on trials that are done. And people tend to tolerate that better. Not very expensive, but only it's usually given on prescription. So that's the other thing you got to think about. But the B12 question, going back to that, so when you're at the bottom end of the normal range, and, it's about perception of how you feel. Now, if you take an oral supplement or even a sublingual supplement, because you can get B12 under the tongue, and if you take any of those on a daily basis, you'll probably push your levels up, but it's going to take ages to get there.
It could take months.
It could take months, easily.
And it's very hard to stay consistent.
It is.
Most people forget their supplements, but they do. They forget.
It is. And what I do as an experiment for my patients is I tend to give them a course of injections only because the injection course takes your levels up higher, quicker. And what you want to see is whether it makes a noticeable difference to how you feel. Because if you do something very slowly, you don't necessarily perceive the benefit. Whereas if you do a course of injections, you think, whoa, I suddenly feel like I'm awake again.
Well, I tell you now, when I knew I was due another B12, I was getting due to have another injection. I would have them every 3 months from the doctor, and I knew I was needing it. I could feel it,
and that's it. And that's why it's so important to not treat a number. Treat the patient and treat the patient's symptoms, because the numbers can look good from 200 to 900 depending on what assay you're doing or what blood test, which lab's doing it. But it's about, I keep saying this to people: you don't treat numbers, you treat people. That's what you do. And so, I think you're right. The B12, the iron's important. The vitamin D and the folic acid are just as important when it comes to the fatigue that people feel when it's, an underactive thyroid.
So if it like iron, just to go back to it as an example, because I know, again, we get loads of ladies who've got iron deficiencies, and I do all the right things. I do red meat, green leafy vegetables, all that in terms of diet. Maybe I'm not absorbing it very well, whatever. I don't liberate it very well from animal protein or whatever. I know when I was pernicious anemia, I was losing so much blood from my period because I had the copper coil. That's why it happened. So I got that out straight away. And then again, over time, it got better. But I'm always still low. Even on that blood test, I'm still very low now. So, again, for iron, what about an IV drip?
Yeah, so if you can't tolerate oral iron and if you can't get your levels to go up to the normal range or an acceptable
range. But I feel like you've got to take so much of it. I'm doing 3-4 boxes of Spartone a month there.
For sure. Yeah.
And it's pricey.
there's no, if that's the case and you need iron and your levels are low, there's no reason why you wouldn't have intravenous iron. You can be given a dose. We use something called ferrous carboxymaltose, or it's called Ferinject, and that's the commonest one that people will use. And it's based on how low your hemoglobin, that's your blood count is. It's based on your weight, and there's a few measurements to do, and there's a variation in dose depending on how much you need. And as long as it's done correctly under medical supervision, if you are iron deficient, it will help. It's definitely a possibility.
What if I did like that every 3 months? B12 and iron every 3 months.
So the iron infusion thing you want to be careful about. So B12 is...
too much iron, that's a bad...
Exactly. So iron is not something you get rid of easily from the body. So too much iron can cause problems by deposition in your liver, other organs within your body. So you don't want to be iron overloading. That is a no-no. B12, not so much, because it gets washed out of your system fairly quickly.
Same with magnesium. It's very difficult. You just wash that straight out.
That's it. But iron, not so much. So with iron, it's got to be very, very tightly regulated. You got to check your levels, and you got to make sure you're doing it within a reasonable medical supervised kind of level that you're dealing with. Not something you want to do lightly. So that's the iron bit.
Okay. So to go back to thyroid. So why is it always particularly women that see issues? And is it women of a certain age?
Yeah, so the women thing is definitely a women thing. There is definitely a disproportion between men and women. Almost as a 3:1 ratio, 4:1 ratio in some studies and populations. And it's a genetic thing. We don't really understand why, but it is what it is. In terms of what age, any age. So if it's in your genes, it is what it is. Most of the time, there are certain times in your life when it is likely to unmask more than other times. Pregnancy is one, and menopause is another. So we find that you can get your thyroid dysfunction manifest itself at these times in your life. It's not that menopause causes it. It just happens to be a time when you're going through hormonal change, and that hormonal change not just affects your female hormones, but also affects your thyroid. And unmasks it at the same time. But like I said at the beginning, sometimes there are life events that often will just trigger a response, and your thyroid just comes alive and does either overactive or potentially just shuts down. And then the shutdown bit is slower to pick up, because you kind of think, oh, I'm just a bit tired. I'm a bit this and a bit that. And then eventually you're thinking, well, this ain't right 3 months or 6 months later. I'm still this. Why is this still going on? And then you're like, suddenly wake up and think, God, I'm 2 stone heavier. Why has that happened? Whereas with the overactive, you tend to feel it more, because you're starting to like get palpitations. You feel uncomfortable. Whereas the underactive end, you're just like, well, I'm just a bit tired, aren't I? So and nobody.
And the thing is, you can put it down to so many. Maybe it's iron deficiency. Maybe it's menopause. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's, I didn't sleep last night. Yeah. It's so hard to pinpoint.
And that's the challenge, is because the symptoms can overlap so much that you just always, but I guess I say to people, no, in this day and age, we are able and have the opportunity and have the ability to do blood tests so easily to check for these things, be proactive about your health. If you're feeling that way, go and get it checked out. Don't wait.
Yeah. Okay. So I've had my T levels, T3, T4 checked out, etc. Normal. But what's normal? You rightly said there's a big spectrum of normal. Yes, you're not going to die. But let's say I wanted to thrive. I want to optimize, and I'm like B12, iron, the lot, right? And I want to feel like top of the world. So could you like microdose like T3 or T4, whatever you might need?
Only if you've been diagnosed with an underactive thyroid.
Okay.
So we don't use thyroxine or T3 or T4 as a supplement.
No.
It's never a good thing to do, because the problem you have is if you start to do that, you start to put yourself at huge risk, because overdoing thyroid hormone replacement, even with underactive thyroid, you have to manage the thyroid hormone levels and the dosing quite carefully. Because if you start to take stuff that your body doesn't need, so there used to be a fad back in the day.
I was just about to tell you this story.
Yeah. So it's where they used to take natural desiccated thyroid or pig thyroid as a supplement for weight loss.
Correct.
Yeah. And the problem with that is you burn, like I was saying at the beginning, if you have too much thyroid hormone in your system, yes, you lose a bit of fat, but you lose muscle and you become unhealthy. And what it does is it affects your heart by making your heart go faster and faster and faster, to the point that you get something called atrial fibrillation, potentially, where you have an irregular heartbeat. That then has a risk of developing strokes. You also have a risk of your bones getting thinner, so increases your bone turnover. So the cells in the bone start to work harder and they leave bigger holes in the bones and cause osteoporosis. And just generally, we tend to find that though over replacement, those are the two major risks that we talk about. But on the whole, there are studies that show that your longevity and stuff can be shortened if you overdo it.
Apologies for interrupting this podcast, but I need to ask a favor. If you're enjoying this podcast so far, then please hit that subscribe button right now. I'll be straight up and honest that I want to see this podcast grow and flourish into something that I'm really proud of. And the only way that I can do that is with your help. So if you've ever learned anything useful from these conversations, then please return the favor by liking, rating, subscribing, and maybe even sharing it with your friends. Thanks very much. Let's get back to the episode. I'll tell you a harrowing story, and it stuck in my mind. So basically, somebody was telling me they were in the medical profession, and they were saying that they knew a consultant who was dosing his daughter with T3 because she was a model. He wanted to keep her underweight, and he also wanted to create the prescription. So if she ever needed it further down the line, she would always have it on her system. And I was like, oh, right, does that make you lose weight? Blah, blah, blah. Didn't know anything about it, right? Just thought, this person who's in the medical profession is telling me that makes me lose weight. So, and at one time I was like a bigger girl, and this stuck in my mind. So I went and got some T3, never took it.
Okay.
Because thank God for that. Because actually, sensible Alyssa thought, if you mess with your hormones, and I'm a big believer in this, by the way, if you start messing up with your hormones, you are, I think I've said this to you before, but like a child's mobile. Imagine a massive child's mobile with all these different dangly things on. You pull on one, you affect them all.
Absolutely.
And that's also what, you're not just treating one thing, you're going to mess up everything.
Absolutely.
And I threw it away. And I just, as a lesson to everybody who thinks that this is a good thing to do, please do not do that.
No, definitely not. So thyroid hormone, we have so many better treatments
Absolutely.
now. You have the actual hormones that you should be getting to help you get your weight under control if you are struggling with your weight. We have Mounjaro and Wegovy now, which are both specifically hormones for weight loss. So please, using thyroid medication to lose weight is just a no-go area completely. For a lot of women who are talking about the weight side of things, a lot of women who have an underactive thyroid who come to me, they come quoting this condition called Hashimoto's. So I'll throw that word in there. So Hashimoto's is a term that's become very popular in social media, online, and stuff like that. It is a known entity. Hashimoto was the name of a scientist, right? But I don't tend to use that term. I tend to call it autoimmune hypothyroidism, which is what Hashimoto's is, right? And you describe the clinical condition. So a lot of them do struggle with their weight because when they have, it's like I said to you, it's so subtle, you don't realize it's happening to you. until you get to a certain point and you're thinking, this ain't right. Then you get diagnosed. Now, the problem is that when you get to that stage, you get put on treatment, say thyroxine, which is what we normally would use. And the thyroxine will get you to start to feel a bit better. Your energy levels will start to improve. And, the majority of people will just go back to functioning normally. But often the weight that you've gained during that time just doesn't seem to go backwards. It doesn't go back to your baseline. They struggle quite a lot. And one of the things that we do help them with is some of the newer medical weight loss agents to help these people when they've gotten to a weight that, triggers that.
You are absolutely describing one of my friends, and I won't name her, but I have said this so many times. She went and did an experiment and she lost a significant amount of weight very quickly. She then came back and she then put on loads of weight. I'm talking 4 stone-ish, right? So significant amount of weight and not really changed their lifestyle that much. Significant. And I spent the last 18 months trying to get it off. It will not come off. And I said, honestly, genuinely, go and get your thyroid checked. I can't have said this week in, week out more times. I was like, go and get your thyroid checked. I am odds on sure it's going to be that. I just know it. Anyway, she didn't, whatever. She is doing a bit of weight loss treatment though.
Okay.
So that was my next question. Should she have, if so, let's say this is describing somebody, right? They've put on a significant amount of weight. And again, they've tried everything. They go in the gym, they've changed their diet. It's not coming off. Should they go and check out their hormone levels first? Obviously, your hormone, absolutely. Before you start any of the Mounjaro, all of that, have a look at that first. And then essentially, let's say she did have an underactive thyroid. You could then give her a top up of
she
T4.
needs treating.
Yeah?
She needs treating.
Yeah.
That's what she needs.
So even if you have started doing the Wegovy or whatever, you still need to put your T4 in.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it doesn't just do that. It does loads of other stuff.
Absolutely. So the point about if you're diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, you need treatment one
She's
way or
got
the
hair
other.
loss, all that. I'm
Absolutely.
thinking this is 100% it. I know it.
And the other thing that people need to recognize is that if you haven't dealt with your thyroid correctly and you're not on enough of a dose, so I like to keep the TSH levels, getting a bit technical, but I'll put it out there because people who have a thyroid problem will know what I'm talking about. But I try and treat you so that your TSH level is less than or equal to 2. Sometimes I'll go as far as 1. So the lower your TSH, depending on your symptoms. If you're well and your TSH is in the middle of the range, that's great. If you're still tired, you want to push the TSH down a bit and see how you feel. But when you're on weight loss medication, you actually need your thyroid to be functioning correctly. Like I said, it's the hormone of metabolism.
Yeah.
There's no point trying a weight loss medication when your metabolism's slow. You got to get your metabolism right. Then only is it worthwhile investing in weight loss medication.
Yeah.
Because actually, you're just wasting your money. You're not going to get the benefit you're looking for. So you got to do both things. And that's why it's important when you're struggling with your weight, always go and get checked up. At the end of the day, you may find that there's an actual reason for this. And otherwise as well, hormones are so complicated. Thyroid is just one of those. And it's about making sure that you look at all of it in general. It's a bit like in men. So we know that with men with the low testosterone, for example, we know that they lose muscle mass and they put on more fat mass around the middle. So again, if you're starting to put on a lot of weight and you're starting to get sluggish and tired, thyroid would be one to look at, but you'd also want to look at your testosterone levels as well. So, it's you got to look at it in context for the person in front of you and how they are and what they're presenting with.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing. I sound like I'm crackers, but whatever. I'm somebody who investigates everything. And I remember going to see a guy in London on Harley Street, and he said to me, I'd put on a lot of weight at this time. But again, I'd been on the island, I'd lost a significant amount of weight, came back just under 9 stone, which is like very slim for me. Obviously not eating for 6 weeks and whatever. Then I put on a load of weight, right, at the other end because the bounce back was unbelievable. Yeah. And I was very heavy at that time, so I was depressed about it. Went to see this guy in London. He said, you're a journalist, aren't you? I said, yeah. And he said, if you write about this, I'll give you this treatment. Anyway, it was a testosterone pellet.
Okay.
That they put under the skin in my bum cheek.
Okay.
He said, it's $5,000 I usually charge for this, but I'll give it to you for nothing. Again, sensible Alyssa was thinking. And by the way, he did my bloods, showed me all the blood work and said, your testosterone level is fine.
Yeah.
I was 32.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right? Again, you start putting something in,
Oh yeah.
you're fucked forever because then your body will just stop. Well, I don't need to make this anymore. What's the point? Because it's already there.
Absolutely.
So I thought this was completely unethical, and I was actually stunned. And then he also said, "Go and read this book." He gave me and he said, "It's really quick. You'll get through it." And I've still got it on my Kindle today, and it was called something like it was basically all about testosterone therapy for women to get rid of the weight loss. Well, to give you some weight loss, create more muscle tissue, give me more energy. And I'm a big believer in that. When it's low enough,
yes,
absolutely, then start replacing it if you want to. But not when you're 32, your levels are fine. And, again, a bit of vanity. I just needed time to come back to equilibrium because I'd been starved, then ate normal, then got weighty, and then it took me a while to get it off again and just be, where I am today. But I thought that was nuts.
Yeah, I mean, historically, there's been so many things that people will try and do to achieve certain goals, and actually, you've got to just look after yourself and be kind to yourself a little bit, I think, and you can do yourself a lot of harm by trying out stuff that shouldn't go into you. Yeah,
well, luckily, I kind of had enough sense, sensible enough not to. I was thinking, this guy's a charlatan. No, I will not be writing about it. Yeah. But that's kind of showing the desperation level I was at because I was so unhappy with the way I am. But what it did teach me on the other end is do not lose weight. Do not starve yourself and lose weight at a significant rate.
Yeah.
Everybody thought it was so much fun. They were like, oh my God, just imagine when you get back from the island, you'll be so skinny, right? And I'll tell you now, anything in the extreme is just, the rebound is going to be worse than where you began.
Absolutely.
That was a big life lesson for me. It's got to be sustainable, slow, consistent effort, then rapid, and then, you'll gain it back with interest.
And that is a big challenge, I think, for most people. Extremes just do not help.
No.
And you've got to pace yourself. You've got to give yourself time. That's a key thing for any change in your body. I mean, even with the thyroid function side of things, if you're overactive, obviously we try and bring it down with medical therapy and calm things down. With underactive, people are so desperate to feel better. You can overdo it sometimes, and you just need to pace yourself with the dose escalation. So we do it gently. You start on a small amount, 25 micrograms, 50 micrograms. You build up in slow increments. You check your blood tests, see how you feel, get the numbers right. And so, I think people, once they're on the right treatment, start to feel better with the thyroid side of things. I think one of the scenarios that I see quite a bit is, and I say quite a bit, I mean, I see it quite a bit, but it's not the general population. You have that small percentage of people who have been treated with thyroxine, which is the standard treatment that everybody gets and from the NHS. And essentially, in 99.9% or 99.5% of people, it does the job and it does everything they need it to. Then you get the few who don't feel the benefit from it, despite me doing everything else, despite me getting their B12 right, their iron, like vitamin D, all of that. And then those people, sometimes we will use forms of T3 hormone replacement. So that's something else that people can explore if they're really desperate. I use the word desperate in the way that they're so tired, fatigued, brain fog that nothing's working. And so we have some great results with those. Unfortunately, not available in the NHS in most places anymore, just because of expense. But it's not that expensive, really, when you think about it.
Quality of life.
Quality of life, and you're not looking at huge amounts of money. I mean, I'll probably quote you about. You probably spend between £30 and £60 a month or something like that for the medication. Depending on how much you need and where you get it from. But there are options out there for people. And that's what I say to people with thyroid dysfunction is, make sure you ask the questions. Don't accept the answer. If you're not right, go and ask the right questions. Make sure you get the blood test done. Make sure everything is as good as you can get it to be, and then see how you feel.
I know a guy who's had his removed.
Oh yeah. So
he has loads of medication and he goes every 3 months for a top-up or something.
Okay. So when do we remove a thyroid gland? Okay. So
it's a guy.
Yeah.
Is that unusual?
It is unusual, but again, so in men, when they get overactive thyroid, we tend to find that it tends to be a little bit more aggressive. And so overactive thyroid is probably the commonest scenario where we'd offer an operation, or thyroid cancer or a lump within the thyroid that we have to be sure isn't cancer. So often people will get a little bit of a lump and then you stick a needle in, you do a biopsy. We have a grading system. If it's cancerous, you definitely take it out. And then there's a whole process to follow behind that with radioactive iodine treatment, etc. The good thing about thyroid cancer is most thyroid cancers are perfectly curable. Okay. And that's a good thing about thyroid cancer. But people do end up needing operations, biopsies, things like that for what we call nodules, where you don't know yet whether it's cancer or not. Often the taking a little bit of fluid out with the needle doesn't always give you the answer. So sometimes you have to go in and take half the thyroid out. Then you're left with half the thyroid's working. Is it working? Is it not working? And then your numbers need to be looked at. You might need, hormone replacement as a result of that. But if you have an overactive thyroid, for example, and it keeps coming back, so we usually use medical therapy to calm the thyroid down. We treat for about a year and a half, and then, things sort of settle. And you have a kind of 60-40%. That's kind of what the textbook will quote you. 60% chance of going into remission. So your thyroid will just calm down, go back to normal, and nothing more needs to be done. 40% it'll come back up again. And if you get it over and over that you're overactive, we'll sometimes take the thyroid gland out. When we operate nowadays, we don't tend to take bits out if there is an overactivity. We just take the lot out. And as a result, once you have the thyroid taken out, you tend to end up anyway on treatment because you don't have a gland anymore to make the thyroid hormone. So you're committed to treatment for life.
For life, yeah.
The other treatment we use for overactivity is radioiodine treatment. So you have that as well as an option. Very safe, very good to use. There's obviously certain things. If you've got young kids, you'll have to wait till they're over 15 before you can have it. Others, you can't be in close proximity to them, which is always difficult when you're a parent with young children. But yeah, there's always options and treatments, and it's about managing those treatments and having the right support to control the levels. Because once you calm the thyroid levels down from an overactive state, you feel so much better. The palpitations settle, your anxiety settles, the tremors settle. People just feel tons better. It's one of those where they really, turn around and thank you so much for just making me feel better so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, he's a 60-year-old guy, and they gave him this radioactive drink. Yeah, and they gave him too much of it. And I remember because he had a young son, and he had to stay completely away from him. Do you know what I mean? At the time, for weeks and weeks, actually. So. Yeah, and they gave him he was like a guinea pig at the time. It was very, very quite new treatment. Whenever he had it. That was, and I always think, well, this is my other thing, right? Especially when the HRT argument comes up as well. So, like, if any other hormone in your body was low, you would replace it.
Yep.
And I always think this about thyroid.
Yep.
You've got issues with thyroid, you can get medication. When we go through menopause and our estrogen drops, progesterone, whatever, testosterone if you want to take it, it's like the only controversial bit of, science where people go, you shouldn't take that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I'm like, well, hang on a minute. If men were low in testosterone, they wouldn't even think twice about replacing it. They wouldn't even think twice. I know people in the 30s who are doing it. And then you've got, if you were deficient in growth hormone, we would replace it. Thyroid, you would replace it. GLP-1's not working very well. Let's give you some.
Yep.
Whatever. But why is the HRT issue such an issue?
It's a great question. And I mean, in my mind, it's not an issue, but, there is still that stigma around it. I mean, I'm a complete supporter of HRT as long as it's done right and you have the right conversations with the people and give, the opportunity. It's because I think historically, the climacteric, as it is called, was kind of the end of the road for a woman's fertile life. And it was like, well, you just have to accept that that's the end of your fertile life. So get on with it. But the world has changed.
And we also know those hormones do a lot more than just like give you a period and make you fertile.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of your muscle mass, your brain health.
Absolutely.
Like you name it. Like,
absolutely.
I mean, we could go on about the 48 symptoms of the menopause. These things all are stemmed, the itchy skin, the burning mouth, the hair loss, whatever. So like, I don't know, it perplexes me. And then obviously a big topic in the news was last week, there was a Panorama documentary in which they really went for, Christ, I'm getting brain fog now, forget her name, Louise Newson. Yeah, because she's got HRT clinic and she's been doing these big doses off license HRT. I mean, she stands behind what she does and fair play. I thought it was a complete witch hunt anyway. and went all in on one person was a bit unfair. But I mean, if somebody's coming back to you and saying, well, I still don't feel right, and you feel, well, you need a more dose, is that the right thing to do then?
Yeah. So I think as long as you know that you've had the conversation with the individual and you keep an eye out for the consequences of that, I think, the standard dose of gel, for example, is, if you're using estrogel, is 2 pumps is the average. 4 pumps is what we call licensed. You go above 4 and, it is off label or off license. I have got maybe a handful, maybe 1 or 2. I could probably count on my hand women that I've needed to give higher doses than 4 pumps. But again, it's done in a very measured way. And I can't imagine that, they're doling out tons and tons of this stuff at that dosage, because most people are actually quite happy on 2 to 4 pumps of estrogen. And yeah, I think, there is a role for it. It's got to be done with a measured, supervised set of circumstances where you keep an eye on bleeding. You look at pelvic pain, because the issue here is the more you give, the more your endometrium, especially if you've got endometriosis, it will drive that endometriosis unless you block it with sufficient amounts of progesterone. And I think that's where the big dichotomy happens. In terms of the long-term sort of cardiovascular benefit and everything like that, I think that HRT is a great thing, especially if you start it early. The key is to start it early. Is to start it at the right time when you're perimenopausal. Don't wait till it's all happened and then suddenly say, I need this stuff now. Because actually that's where the cardiovascular risk goes up. And now with transdermal, so skin preparations, patches and gels, the risk of clots and stuff is minimal. In terms of breast cancer risk, obviously it's something to talk about, and you got to weigh up the pros and cons for you as an individual. Because is it about something that might happen versus how horrible is my life at this point in time, the way I feel? And do I take that risk because that's my risk to take? And as long as you have an open and honest conversation about those risks and benefits, then, I'm a firm believer that it's got to be about shared care. It's got to be about the shared decision making with the patient, and that's how you got to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, last time you came on here, I remember saying, I'm 39, I'm not perimenopausal, and you went like that, right? and I'll tell you now, since then, and obviously I'm very clued into this. I talk about it every day. I'm so aware of the symptoms. I have a, pretty good lifestyle compared to most, you know what I mean? Like, so careful about what I eat. I exercise, I'm active. I do all the things right, try and get my sleep, don't have anything but tea and water. And I think I've started to get symptoms now. And so I was on holiday, actually. I was chatting to a lady that I was on who came for dinner with us. And she just started taking some bioidentical hormones, and she said she feels a lot better for it. And I was thinking, oh, right, maybe, I don't know, am I too young for it? Because when you listen to like the traditional literature, they wouldn't even entertain me if I went into the GP. They're not even entertaining me at all. And I haven't got any bad symptoms at all. I'm just like a little bit brain foggy or something like that, or a little bit, just not great, or my period is a little bit later than I think it should be.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the only symptoms I've had so far, right? I'm not 40 yet, but it's.
So I think
it's because I'm hyper alert to these things.
Well, that's it. I think it's about the individual, isn't it? At the end of the day, that's why you can't generalize these things. You got to take each person, on a case by case basis. And if you're getting symptoms, especially premenstrual exacerbations, so as you're getting up towards your period, you realize that you're really going through an up and down. You're okay for the first, 25 days or whatever. And then the last 3 days leading up to that 28-day cycle, you're just like, your
angry,
partner,
raging.
Your husband's like, who's
who
this
the hell
woman?
are you?
Who the hell are you? And if those symptoms are starting to show, if your periods are starting to go a little bit atypical to what you normally would be, I'm on the clock, 28 days. Oh, but it's been 30 days this time, and it's 31 or 29 or, those kind of subtle things may indicate that you're going through that initial stage. If things are bad enough, then yes, by all means, trial of treatment. So I don't say this is what you need. I say, look, it could be that this is what you need. It's safe enough to try a little bit. why don't you try it and see how you feel? If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, at least you know that we've tried it, and then you wait until it gets bad enough to warrant a more more structured ongoing treatment. The other thing is, at your age, we may not necessarily use traditional HRT because a lot of women want contraception. So we'll often just say, well, why don't we take a combined pill? Because actually the combined pill has estrogen and progesterone. It's just a different form, and it usually is stronger. And actually what it gives you is the estrogen and progesterone that you need, but it also gives you contraception because HRT doesn't give you contraception.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So often, usually if you're below 45, that would be an option that I would offer someone. And then again, it boils down to us having made a joint decision about what's right for them.
And what like testosterone, why is it not given like so freely? Because you're dropping in that too. And I would argue that it's so important, especially for a woman's mental health. Forgive me, if I take too much estrogen, I'm going to start putting on weight. Boobs are going to get sore. There's lots of side effects that I do not want from more estrogen. You know, the weight thing for me is like the biggest thing. So what I want is lean muscle mass.
Yeah.
I want energy. I want to be firing on all cylinders. And forgive me, this is what testosterone does. That's what it gives you, that drive. You can lean into a challenging situation a bit more.
Yeah, so it's a great perspective, and it's a perspective that I hear from a lot of my patients, right? The thing about estrogen, so first of all, estrogen on its own, as long as it's used in the right amount and given to the, at the right time, should not make you put on weight. If you're putting on weight, either you're on too much or too little, both can happen, or there's something else going on. So you got to just keep that open mind because, most women just feel great and the estrogen does what it's supposed to do if you get the levels right. Now, in addition to that, when you start talking about testosterone, traditionally, what we try and focus on is the whole libido thing. It's about what's postmenopausal libido like. And if you've got a drop in libido, that's where the greatest benefit is seen and the greatest sort of evidence base is.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't have other benefits too. It's just that for the risks of what you put into someone, you don't particularly want to be using that as your solution. So, if you're putting on weight and your weight's, if you're 27, if your BMI is 27 plus or BMI is 30 plus or whatever, I'd rather you went on a GLP-1 or on GLP-1 GIP, so Mounjaro Wegovy, than gave you testosterone for that reason. I'd rather give you the right thing for the right purpose if it's a weight issue.
Yeah.
If it's about energy and motivation and stuff like that, yes, absolutely. If your estrogen's at an optimal dose, then potentially yes, but we don't really have the evidence base to say I'm gonna hide behind evidence because as a physician, I work within the rules, but I will individualize. After I've been through the basics and I've done everything the way I can, if someone turns around to me and says, I have got low libido, but you know what? More than the libido, what it's done for me is it's made me feel confident.
Yeah.
I feel more switched on. I'm like, great, bonus. And that's how you got to look at it.
Yeah.
So I'll never sell it as it's this magic thing. That's the wrong thing to do. You set expectations, right?
Isn't it just about topping up what's like, to go back to our theory of, well, these things are dropping, yet we're all living longer, so you want a more quality of life, just replacing it.
Yeah.
So if your estrogen's dropping, you'd replace it.
Yep.
Progesterone's going, we replace it.
Yep.
But we're not going to replace testosterone, that's also going.
Yeah, so the testosterone bit, I'm a firm believer of testosterone replacement in women as well.
Yeah.
So I've got no issue with that. I think the awareness is the issue. Do you know what I mean? I think the awareness is not an issue in women. The awareness is a bit of an issue in healthcare professionals.
Yeah, correct.
And that's the challenge that we're trying to bridge between the two. And to be honest, I learn from my patients every single day.
I know.
If I sit here and say that I know it all and I'm the professor of endocrinology or whatever it is, actually every single day someone walks in and drops a little pearl of wisdom that I think, I never thought of it that way. Or I never thought that it would have that effect on my patients. And actually you keep putting together all that information and then you keep sharing it. And the next person who comes in benefits from the experience of the previous patient. And that's the only way that you start to improve people's quality of life and you get them, feeling better, which is what, and as you said, optimizing their health. That's what you want to get to.
Yeah, that's where I want to get to. Absolutely. I want to go and get a DEXA scan. That's the other thing actually. I was thinking, I wonder how much muscle mass I've actually got. Because I actually really genuinely want to start like looking at it. And then next year I'll get another one and I want to see if I'm at least maintaining.
Yeah.
I think I'm a bit, I don't know, maybe I'm just at one end of the spectrum. It took, I'm in this health wellness world and I look at these things a lot of the time and I think, yeah, I'd go and have a DEXA scan. I'd go and have my VO2 max done. I'd go and, and I want to make sure my level, you need to know where your baseline is.
That's
so you
for
could
sure.
either improve on it
Yeah.
or maintain it.
Yeah. So a DEXA scan is an interesting one, right? So a lot of people do use, you've got other ways of measuring fat mass and, and sort of lean mass and stuff using bioimpedance. So you get certain weighing scales that send little electrical
I feel like
pulses
they
and
don't
stuff.
work. I could take a big drink of water and it would give me a
yeah,
different...
that is true.
Yeah.
So fluid does affect that quite a lot. But a DEXA is a good way to do it. It's not commonly available. There are certain places that will do DEXA.
It's like a private thing.
It's a private thing, absolutely.
And it more to look at my bone health, actually, it was.
Absolutely. So from a bone health point of view, absolutely, especially perimenopausal, postmenopausal women, although the risk is low at your stage in life, I'm not worried about it being an issue. But if you've got a family history, if you've had problems in the past with sort of calcium, vitamin D, whatever, then it's worth doing it. But more than that, it's like, at the age of 40, right, you get a well man or well woman check, right? The NHS even advocates that. Not all of us take it up, unfortunately. And, it's just one of those things. But if you're willing to do a set of blood tests on a woman at age 40, why wouldn't you consider doing other things to get, get a baseline view? A DEXA scan is an X-ray, but it's a tiny, tiny bit of X-ray radiation. And if it's normal, you only need to really repeat it 5 years down the line. Yeah. There's no point doing it multiple times. Even with osteoporosis, we don't repeat it every year. We wait, do 2 to 3 years, we treat, and then eventually we'll repeat in maybe 2 to 3 years' time if at all you need to. And so there are things, I think empowerment from knowledge of what your body's like at any given time is a huge thing. But that's a mindset thing. It's not for everybody. No. There's people that I look after who just don't want to know.
I know.
They just want to bury their head in the sand and like, I'm okay. So why do I need to do all of this stuff? And it's about each to his own, which is fine. I think for people like that, it's making sure that there's a support structure and a fallback if they get ill, that you deal with it. But for people who are really keen and want to be on top of it, as long as they're not putting themselves in harm's way, and they don't go all out and do things that probably they don't need to, because you can get caught up in the whole, do you know what I mean?
Course.
You could stuff yourself full of this, that, and the other, and actually it may not be doing anything.
Yeah.
You're probably just fine as you are.
Yeah.
But I think it's having that level of sensibility around how much you go all guns blazing into these things.
Yeah. Oh, like I said, I've been for many consultant appointments with people and thought, no, I'm not doing this. You know what I mean? But yeah, no. Well, we've come to the end of our chat today, Frank. But again, as always, enlightening and wonderful and loads of great, valuable information there for everybody listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's always good.
Thank you.
Thank you.